Most people buy watches for the brand name, but here's the question no one really wants to answer. Are you buying the watch or are you buying the logo? Because lately, some lesser-known brands have been making watches with specs, finishing, and designs that honestly feel way too good for the money. Sapphire crystals, automatic movements, solid finishing, even designs inspired by watches that cost thousands. And that creates a serious question. If a watch gives you the same experience for a fraction of the price, does the brand name still matter? Well, that's exactly what we're about to find out. So in today's video, we're looking at 5 AliExpress watches that genuinely make no sense for the money. Let's start with one that shocked almost everyone who tried it. Okay, this is obviously not a Rolex, but when a watch costs around $240, looks this close to a luxury GMT watch, and still gives you specs like this, things start getting interesting very fast. Because the Cronos L6029M GMT genuinely doesn't feel like a typical cheap watch once you see it in person. The finishing alone is already surprising. Sharp case lines, brushed surfaces, polished edges, and a bracelet that feels much more solid than people usually expect at this price range. The fixed 24-hour bezel, the white dial, and the GMT hand instantly give the watch that explorer-style luxury sports watch vibe. But what makes it stand out is that it still manages to feel clean and modern instead of looking overly flashy. The dial is honestly one of the strongest parts of the watch. The textured pattern reflects light beautifully, the applied markers look sharp, and overall it has the kind of depth you normally expect from much more expensive watches. And unlike many budget watches that only focus on appearance, this one actually gives you solid specs too. You get a sapphire crystal, automatic GMT movement, a screw-down crown, and strong water resistance, which adds real value beyond just the design. On the wrist, it feels balanced, comfortable, and surprisingly premium for something in this category. And once you realize it costs around $240, you start questioning how much of luxury watch pricing is actually about the watch and how much is just the logo. This is the kind of watch that completely changes people's expectations once they hold it in their hands. Because at first, most people assume San Martin is just another random AliExpress brand, until they actually see the level of quality you're getting for the price. The finishing is easily one of the biggest surprises here. The case has sharp transitions between brushed and polished surfaces, the bracelet feels solid, and even the bezel action feels far more refined than what most people expect from a watch in this category. And visually, the watch has that clean luxury tool watch aesthetic that instantly makes it feel more expensive on the wrist. It doesn't look cheap, overloaded, or overly flashy. Everything feels balanced and well executed. The dial also plays a huge role in that premium feel. Strong lume, applied markers, and crisp details give the watch a much more serious appearance than the price would suggest. But the impressive part is that it's not only about looks. You also get features that people normally expect from much higher-end watches, including a sapphire crystal, automatic movement, screw-down crown, and strong water resistance. And once you wear it, the weight and overall build quality make the watch feel genuinely premium instead of just good for the money, which honestly makes the price even crazier, because depending on the version, this watch usually sits around $250 to $300. This is probably the watch on the list that most watch enthusiasts would secretly choose for themselves, because the IXDAO Engineer doesn't just focus on specs or finishing, it focuses on details that make the watch feel genuinely high-end on the wrist. The first thing that stands out is the integrated bracelet design. It gives the watch that luxury sports watch look usually associated with brands that cost thousands of dollars. And surprisingly, the bracelet itself feels extremely solid, with tight tolerances, and finishing that honestly feels difficult to believe at this price. The case design also plays a huge role. Sharp edges, brushed surfaces, polished accents, and the overall proportions make the watch feel clean, modern, and much more refined than people expect from an AliExpress brand. The dial is another strong point. Depending on the version, you get textured patterns, applied markers, and excellent light reflection that add a lot of depth to the watch throughout the day. And unlike many watches that only look good in pictures, this one actually delivers on specs too. You get a sapphire crystal, automatic movement, screw-down crown, and strong build quality. making it feel like a serious everyday sports watch instead of just a cheap alternative. But honestly, the biggest surprise is the overall experience. Because once it's on the wrist, it stops feeling like an AliExpress watch and starts feeling like a genuinely premium sports watch, especially when you realize it costs around $300 or less, depending on the version. This watch takes a completely different approach compared to the others on this list. Instead of trying to look modern or aggressive, the Baltany S402 focuses on vintage military design. And honestly, that's exactly what makes it stand out. The first thing you notice is how clean and balanced the watch feels. The 36mm case size gives it a classic vintage proportion that wears extremely comfortably on the wrist, especially if you prefer watches that don't feel oversized. The dial is simple, highly legible, and full of character. From the vintage-style numerals to the warm lume and brushed finishing, everything feels intentionally designed instead of cheaply made. And despite the old-school look, the actual build quality is surprisingly modern. You still get features like a sapphire crystal, automatic movement, and solid case finishing, which immediately make the watch feel more premium than most people expect. One thing Baltany does really well is attention to detail. Small elements like the crystal shape, the hands, and the overall proportions give the watch a much more authentic vintage feel instead of looking like a cheap imitation. And that's why this watch becomes so interesting, because it doesn't try to impress you with flashy specs or hype. It wins through design, comfort, and character, especially when you realize it usually costs around $200 to $300, which honestly feels very reasonable for the experience it gives. And this is probably the watch most people expected to see on this list, because when people talk about affordable AliExpress watches, Pagani design is usually one of the first names that comes up. But honestly, there's a reason for that. The PD1820 gives you a level of design and overall presence that feels far above what the price suggests. The case finishing, the bracelet, and the sporty luxury-inspired look instantly make the watch feel more expensive once it's on the wrist. One of the strongest parts of the watch is simply how wearable it is. The proportions are clean, the dial stays easy to read, and overall, it has that versatile everyday sports watch look that works in almost any situation. And despite the affordable price, you still get features people actually care about, including a sapphire crystal, automatic movement, solid bracelet, and strong overall finishing. Of course, it's clearly inspired by much more expensive luxury sports watches, and that's part of why it became so popular online. But what surprises most people is how solid the watch actually feels in person compared to what they expected. And honestly, that's what this whole video comes down to. Because whether you love these watches or hate them, they force you to ask a real question. Are you buying the watch for the experience and quality, or are you mostly paying for the name on the dial? But anyway, that's it for today's video. Let me know which watch surprised you the most, and I'll see you in the next one with more watches, more underrated picks, and even crazier value finds.